This episode of Super Pulp Science is brought to you by the Shared World, now open for submissions at sharedworld.ca.
Attention, citizens! It's time for Super Pulp Science!
This is Super Pulp Science, a live recording from Keycon 42. Here on the show with us, come on in. Yes, we are currently in room 305 of Keycon. There are a number of guests here with us. Say hello, everybody. Yes, and I have with me my co-conspirators on the Shared World. When was the last time we were all together in a room? It's a good question. I'm not sure the answer. Jonathan Ball is here with me. Dr. Jonathan Ball, Poet Laureate of Health. Chadwick Ginther, which we often say in the Shared World, the best of us. He's constantly providing us with the signposts of professional writers' etiquettes, which we really appreciate. And then also poisonous, hallucinogenic mushroom content sprinkled in for good measure.
You gotta have it.
And my co-writer on The Once Lands, James Gillespie, is also here. And he arrived with at least one new book project for me, simply because he wants me to work until my bones are dust. Is that right, James?
Absolutely.
Okay. So what we're going to talk about here on Super Pulp Science is how genre gets made. We do a show all about how working creatives do this for a livelihood, how it all comes together, and what are the limits of and the benefits of genre conventions. Now, I sent these gentlemen, something I normally don't do on Super Pulp Science is prepare. Our show that we record weekly is usually whatever's happening. But since we were going to be in this nebulous environment, I asked these guys to think about what role genre plays in how we write. So for context, I will say this. The Shared World began when both Chadwick, Ginther, and I decided to write short stories for a Conan Cthulhu Sword and Sandal horror anthology. And we were provided with very strict genre limitations. And then James and I were talking about how, because we had those limitations, we didn't have to think about how to start. We just started and tried to stay within those genre limitations. But do you have a different recollection of how that all started, Chad?
No, it was, I think the anthology was called Swords v. Cthulhu.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
If I remember correctly, and just saw it, and it was like, yes, it had to include Lovecraftian elements, and it had to include the sword and sandals, sword and sorcery kind of flavoring to go along with that. And both of those things were up my alley, and I can't remember if you sent it to me or I sent it to you.
I think, as is usual, since you've published 40 short stories and I've published like 8, you sent me the link for like, you should do a story, you lazy bastard, something like that. And James and I had been looking for just an excuse to like hang out and do creative stuff. And I was like, come over, let's brainstorm some things. And pretty soon we had giant forests, hoofed spider gods chasing archers through the woods. And then the rest was history. We now have our Shared World collection. We have the Once Lands complete story collection, the Kyber complete story collection. We've got a Shared World magazine. We have Draxus coming out later this year, and at least and the Thistledramore is also in publication, as well as 2 other Shared World projects that are sort of on the horizon. So the reason I bring this all up is because we've left out the punchline, Chadwick. Did your story get into that anthology?
It did not.
No. Did my story get into that anthology? It did not. This all started, and this whole slate of books and projects, because we decided to write for a genre anthology, and neither of us were accepted. We both got sort of like, I got, if there was 2 more spots or 3 more spots, we'd have you. And I think you were like, you're next on the list.
Yeah, I was told that my story was the last one that was rejected.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
It's the most
Yeah.
answerable.
Yeah.
High praise.
Yeah.
High praise. But as with most things in the world, we often remind people that spite is an excellent motivator. And so what we decided to do, because we had a big convention coming up, is we both loved our stories. I credit you with it that we should put them together just in a volume and call it Shared World.
Because they were already thematically consistent.
That's right.
And I don't know if that was a year where neither of us otherwise had a new book coming out.
Yeah, there was something like that. But
And it felt like, let's make sure that we have a new book for Comic-Con.
Right. And technology had just caught up, so short run printing of that variety was easy to accomplish locally, which is sort of a mandate. I like to keep the dollars in the province. And then we just did a short run of those books, sold through them, laughed our way to the bank, and then said they would have only paid us $100 to write those stories or whatever. And so there was clearly a demand for our weird brand, which is I think a reminder. It's not an endorsement of us as writers, but more a reminder that editors have tastes that change daily. And so you just have to keep submitting. You have 40 short stories published, so like you just keep submitting, and eventually you'll find the market for them.
Well, they're selling a brand as well.
That's right, yes. And so we were a little off-brand, so we made our own brand.
Yeah, I think my short story that collected the most rejections before it sold had like over 20 rejections before
Amazing.
I found the editor, before I found the collection that came together at the right time for it
As a chair.
to suit.
Nice.
My favorite story along those lines is I once was invited to submit a story to a journal. Like they contacted me and said, "Hey, we want to publish one of your stories. Love your work. Please send us a story." So I sent it to them, and then they rejected it. And the rejection note, the person who had requested it had written a nice handwritten note saying, "I'm sorry. I love this story, but everyone else hated it."
Yeah. That happens. Yeah.
And that can happen. Sorry. No. I was just going to say that can happen if you're submitting to anthologies or also to competitions. Like it's the luck of the draw in terms of who's the first reader, because usually there's the first round of readers and then they send the good ones up to the real judges. And
That's right, to tastemaker.
you can just get
Yeah.
a person that just hates your stuff. I got notes about that.
I even like this genre.
I think that what I got out of the whole situation was the value that we saw in the experience that we had. And so much so that we ended up as collaborators instead of competitors for a space in an anthology.
Oh, absolutely true. Yeah.
And the value was that we decided to do it again the next year.
Yeah.
And
Well, and it shows though the value of actually finishing something,
yes.
because none of that would have happened if I
hadn't been a
I
deadline.
sent Gregory if the link to the deadline, and he chose not to write a story.
Yeah. Then
We wouldn't have had a shared world collection even if
Yeah.
I had finished. If both of us hadn't actually completed our stories.
Yeah. And if I hadn't
wouldn't be
phoned
here.
up James and said, "Do you want to come over and make up a monster story?" He was literally like, "I'll be right over."
I can't wait to dance across the top of the trunk in your living room.
That's right. Yeah. And I don't remember if you had just stopped, just by the virtue of the geography, James would often ride his bike to and from work past the front of my house. And so we were already in the habit of like drop-ins, like just come in and we'll like shoot the shit for a little while or whatever. And so it was just this natural state. We spoke, for those of you who listen to the podcast regularly, our last episode, we spoke about the importance of thinking about storytellers the way the fire began. You're not trying to reach farther than the firelight. You build a fire, people gather around it. You're just telling that story for those people. And that's what it felt like when you and I got together. Yeah. There wasn't a lofty ambition. There wasn't, do you think they'll like it? It was, man, and it should be stone arrowheads should be the only things that work against the monsters. And rather than say yes or no, we just ask the question, well, why? If true, why? If true, why? And when you're building in genre, that's all you're trying to do is you're saying, well, if that's true, then why?
Conan, what is best in life? To crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentation of their women.
I call that going to the end of the idea. I think a lot of times people, what they'll do is they'll get an idea from however they get an idea, and then they'll start assessing the idea as if you could evaluate it.
Right.
But you can't evaluate it. You have to go to the end of the idea and see what it is. Like, is it anything? You know, you can't start like picking it apart. You just have to go with it and see, is there something there?
Yeah, an idiom that you use a lot when we're writing, Jonathan, is make it more of what it is, right?
Yeah.
If it seems a little weird and you wonder, should I cut the weird part? Well, actually, no, make it more of what it is. Make it as weird as possible before you decide that it's not weird enough, right? Or it's too weird.
And if you got the idea, well, maybe only arrowheads work, it's like, instead of being like, well, no, but something else. It's like, no, well, if that's the world,
Yeah.
you know, what else is true? Because often that one thing isn't interesting.
Yeah.
Something else that's true in that world is interesting.
Yeah, and so what became true, James, in your, shall we call it, in your day-to-day life, you work with Canada's history publication, Canada's History Magazine, and so
Formerly the Beaver.
formerly the Beaver. Actually, you should say that in a breathy voice into the microphone.
I'm going to campaign to make it called the Beaver again.
Make it more of what it is.
There is a code of conduct at Keycon, and I will remind you that it's printed here in the front of this thing. The Keycon Code of Conduct.
Conversations happen at the Canada's History Office.
To make provisions for the safety of all members, this is paramount. So if any of you feel that we have left the core concept of our panel discussion, I believe we are far afield of that. Here's what I want to say. Before you guys all got here, James was telling a delightful story of sitting on the front porch of his house, on the front step of his house, slowly grinding an old axe with a file until it was sharp enough to be of use. And I think that is when Chadwick's talking about submitting to anthologies, submitting 20 times before it gets there. You're just grinding it until it's sharp enough to be what it is, right? Getting the idea all the way to it is. An axe head is just a lump of metal on a stick, right? But if you need to make it more of what it is, you have to grind it until it's sharp enough to cut.
Can I just bring it back to your topic? Like connect
Great
that
idea.
to the topic.
Right.
So when you're talking about genre and like what use is genre, what good is it, does it work, whatever. What I think the key of it to me is figuring out what is the genre, because often what we get with the genre is always conventions. And I think you have to, as a writer, separate out what I call the obligatory conventions versus the optional conventions. I think there's a set of the conventions that are obligatory in the sense that you have to do those things or you're not in the genre. But then there's all these other optional things that accrete. And if the key to me, a lot of it is like figuring out, well, what is the obligatory thing I really got to do to respect my genre? And then what optional things have other people shoved in here and then started treating like they're obligatory? Let me just strip those things away and start subverting those things while staying true to the other things.
And it's
Sorry, but can I ask, how would you define genre?
Okay, so, well, there's a tongue-in-cheek way you can define genre, and it goes like this. If an impossible thing happens after you push a button, it's science fiction. If an impossible thing happens after you wave a wand, it's fantasy, right? It's just the ways in which...
See, I disagree with what you're saying. So I'll just say that. I got a different definition.
Yeah, okay, so we'll get to that. So genre in and of itself comes from the outside. Stories are stories, and whatever's interesting to you and whatever's inside the firelight, that's just a story. Genre is what happened when stories were gathered over a few hundred years into places and people had to figure out how to turn them into money. Genre is ultimately just a column by which people can, in a shorthand, know what to expect, right? That's why you go into a grocery store and there's a big sign that says bread and a big sign that says dairy. It doesn't say all the things that are inside that, but you're at least going towards the thing you think you need, right? And so genre just serves that purpose, right? But as you cut it more finely, you're getting to more specific flavors. And if you know people who are wine people, they're incorrigible. If you know people who are coffee people, they're incorrigible. And if you know people who are genre people in writing, they can also be incorrigible.
Well, speaking as a book buyer for over 25 years, like professionally, that's what I do for a living. When I'm not writing books, I'm selling them. You look at any catalog, that's what those categories are.
In genre.
Right? In genre, and they break it down. Sometimes it's incredibly granular, but even what is the difference between fiction and literature?
Right.
It's not the quality of the book; it's the reader that the publisher is aiming it at.
That's right.
Literary fiction is a genre.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like your grocery store analogy, actually. I'd say that's probably the closest definition I've heard to genre as I understand it. It's just...
Please mark the
Actually,
time
that
and
works.
date. Jonathan and I have agreed on a topic
I actually
related to
think
writing.
That's a really great metaphor, because to me it's just groupings. It's a story type. I use the terms, how I define genre is a story type. And so it's very much like if you had a, typology, it's just a typology. So as you say, it's externally imposed, or expo. Yeah, it externally imposed.
The social convention.
It's effectively a convention, but it's a set of conventions. There's certain, but I think the problem, I don't find that whole discussion super interesting. What I find interesting though is people have the idea. What happens is the idea creeps in, and this is I think where a lot of the problems come from. The idea creeps in that all these conventions constitute a genre. No, there's most genres have 2 conventions.
So let's pause on that and let me ask these two gentlemen on the other side, so James and Chadwick, when we say a Conan versus Cthulhu, right, as genre conventions, which is what happened, how this whole thing started, what are the first few limitations that come to mind? What must be included in those stories in order to qualify for those flavors, would you say?
And I wouldn't necessarily, but if we say Conan versus Cthulhu as shorthand, you don't need the sandal-wearing loincloth barbarian. You don't need to have, the octopus monster that lives under the sea, eternally dreaming and dead. But what I feel you need is you need that ineffable horror that is beyond understanding of whoever your mortals are. And you need mortals who are striving against that. So, and whether they are, if you're looking specifically in the Conan mold, you kind of want that low-born, whether they're a little like the roguish, they're a little bit on the shiftier side of things. Yeah.
So
right. So
hold on, ineffable horror and mortals who strive. Right? And I think that's when you and I sat down, right? I was like, okay, well, these guys are in the woods. What should they have? And you were like, a bow. Now, for the dear listener, why do you want to include a bow, James?
Oh, because I'm an archer.
Right?
So you write what you know.
Yeah. So James can go out into the woods. He can look at a living tree, kill it for his own pleasure, and then shape it into a bow himself. So write what you know. And so that gave us an opportunity to have a mortal that's like, to me, there's nothing more of a mortal who strives than someone who can figure out how to make a stick fly through the air and land where it's supposed to be.
Yeah. Well, for that particular anthology, I wanted to get as far away from the Conan mold with my protagonist as I could. So my hero was a 50-year-old midwife.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah.
And I made her a woman of color because I thought this would piss off H.P. Lovecraft. and that's kind of that was how I was playing against the tropes of it, by having a protagonist who would not be the hero of a Robert E. Howard or H.P. Lovecraft story.
A pittance to protect you from evil.
I am evil. You're sluts.
Like, is that idea you set these characters and some of these scenarios in very different fashions, but then you look at the city of Cairo, right? And it feels so secure in that sort of Sandals world, right? You can be walking through those streets and feel like the characters that you've created could exist completely beside Conan, right?
But there's also this element of like the high fantasy and the low fantasy. I was really more interested. Okay, so I saw Conan the Barbarian, the movie, before I had ever read Annie Howard. And as many children of the 80s, I saw it much too young.
Yep.
And I should have read the stories first, right? But to me, the first image of Conan and that whole genre is him and Subutai the archer running over empty fields. Just run, like they got to get somewhere. They don't have horses. They're just going to run there. And so much of Oncelands is predicated on this idea that it's just people that got to get somewhere. They're going to run there. They're just going to walk.
Yeah, I even take issue with the term sword and sorcery on a certain level. In fact, when I was coming up with my stories for the shared world, I literally sat there and thought, okay, the genre is sword and sorcery. What if I don't give her a sword and she hates sorcery?
But you're going from the beginning, you're like, I'm going to blow it all up.
But other people in the world have swords and sorcery, so yeah, it's fine.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I was going to say, isn't that common with the sword and sorcery genre as like the way of
The hatred of sorcerers?
Yeah.
This is very common.
Yeah. And the idea that the sorcerers are like kind of this evil elite power structure, and then the hero kind of fights against it.
Well,
and
so
then
my
consider-
subversion with the Oncelands was that the evil sorcerers were the good guys. Like everyone dislikes them, and they were torn down. It's sort of like the aftermath. And most of those stories in Howard and the ones that came after, there's always some great tower, there's always some great civilization, and then in comes the mortal that strives, and they tear it all down. Well, I kind of wrote in that post-apocalypse, our Vanny characters were once those sorcerers, learned the lesson of being torn down, and then are now trying to use those powers more or less for good.
Okay.
The question I have is, to what extent do the conventions or tropes create the genre, and to what extent do the genre create the tropes? And there are some that automatically cannot be in the genre, like Conan can't have a card.
Right. Yeah. So I think this becomes that recursion error problem that happens inside of genre, is that the echo is competing with the voice, and then it just becomes noise after a while. And I think that, in my humble opinion, that happened with steampunk. That's why we have no more good steampunk novels sort of being attempted, is because the things that were suggested to be what you needed to have in your steampunk novel got in the way of why you were writing a book in the first place, which is like to plumb the depths of your human experience and try to bring up something worth sharing.
Well, and if you look at Dungeons and Dragons, it started being influenced by sword and sorcery, heroic fantasy, the Lord of the Rings, weird fiction. All of that stuff was in the mix.
That's right.
And then
the lawsuit
over the 50 years now, D&D has become its own genre.
Yeah.
And so it's become its own type of fantasy, whether you like that or not.
Yeah, and this idea that if people come to fantasy through the lens of Dungeons and Dragons and then find Tolkien, you believe that the genre convention is that there are tall elves and regular people and little small people who live in hills, and that's just part of the genre. But the reverse is true, right? Gygax and company were infringing on the copyright of J.R.R. Tolkien originally in their publications. They called them hobbits, and then they were told, you can't do that. And so halflings, right? And so they were just mimicking what they loved. They were like, let's play this as a game. But it wasn't because they had this lofty idea to make this great empire. They were just telling stories around the firelight, and other people said, can I do that? And so they wrote some of them down and started sharing them at conventions, right?
Yeah, can genres avoid being derivative?
I would say no.
No. I have to agree. Note the date and time. I completely agree with Jonathan in this.
So that doesn't mean you can't reinvent the genre to different degrees.
that there always has to be some key work or key works that kind of inspire. Like,
That's right.
I think of like a more recently evolved genre, like kids on bikes, right? It's been
Right.
a thing that kind of came out of the last 20 years, even though it's like based on like things like E.T. from the 80s.
Well, I love this is a great one because it's modern, right? It's new. And so when people say, oh, well, genre is just constantly eating itself and then it'll disappear. Well, no. Even in the attempts to mimic other genres, a new one was formed. And this Kids on Bikes, right?
This slasher genre is the best example of that, because if you go back to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's before that genre codifies itself.
Sure.
So you have a final girl. She doesn't kill the monster. She runs up the stairs, then out the window on the ground.
Right.
And keeps running. So all the stuff that kind of, you can see like the
seeds.
the seeds, everything, but then later it gets so codified.
Yeah.
You wait here,
seems
I'll be
weird.
back for the cat.
That's right. Yeah. Right. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a good example too of the things you believe are the parts of the slasher genre, which is the final girl is trapped in the house. The one that sort of set the mo immediately broke that. That's boring. Right? No, she jumps out the window and leaves. Like that's what that first thing you'd do. If someone's chasing you.
Yeah.
Right? You wouldn't care that you might get hurt falling out a window.
You're gonna get hurt if Leatherface catches.
That's
you.
right. Yeah.
That's often why being derivative is, on one hand, I think the fate of a genre writer, but also the often the fix for that is to go back to the start. Like The Witch is the other great example I love to pull out. That guy, that Tor from Witch.
Yeah.
He to make that movie, he went right back to like, well, what do people actually believed about witches? Because what had happened when he came out with The Witch, everybody was just doing a version of an earlier witch. They hadn't really gone to what the witch was. And he's just stripped away,
Witch in that.
Forget about basing witches on earlier witch stories.
Yeah.
But what was the first witch story? Let's base off that.
And
it seemed really fresh and new as a result, although technically it's not.
What's marvelous about that is when you strip away all the other witch-related content down to its core, the most original, interesting idea in that genre of folk horror was laid bare in The Witch, which is simply only Christians can become witches because you have to believe in the devil in order for him to talk to you, right? And that makes it folk horror, is that they're the architects of their entire destruction. The thing they're most afraid of is a result of their own culture, right? Which is contrary to how it is usually portrayed as this pagan othering, right? And they're coming from outside and only this pure, glorious, light-filled idea can save the day. No, it's the opposite of that, right? You have to believe in the devil in order to have a witch be created. And so, well, pagans don't believe in the devil, so they're actually safe from witchcraft, right? And so those things where you're trying to pare the genre down, right, can sometimes, if handled well, making it more of what it is, just constantly saying, what are the elements that I can do without?
Yeah, I think so much of it to me as a writer is thinking about, okay, what is this genre versus what do people think it is?
Yeah.
And finding out like what it really is versus what people think it is, to me is where a lot of the originality in a genre lies. Although technically it's a derivative thing to be in a genre in the first place.
Well, usually, derivative something is something that people enjoy, they want more of, they want that excitement of that genre.
And there's nice preloaded nature into a lot of the genres. Like I really love the horror genre because to me, what the horror genre is about at its heart is what is real and the nature of reality. And there's other things going on, but it's very much about the nature of reality and ontology and what is true and real. And the monster represents the truth. And so there's lots of things you could spin off in that direction, but as a guy who just philosophically is interested in these themes, to me it's nice that you've got a preloaded genre, you've got an audience that's preloaded to accept things in that genre. One of the things that's nice about genre in a sense too is that the audience has been trained in certain ways. And so I feel like as a creative writer who works in a lot of different genres, to me, the biggest problem always is how do you train the audience into what you're doing, like how to read your story. And if you're working in a genre, it's nice because they have a pre-training and you can go against their training and surprise them, but you can also go with, you don't have to explain everything to them all the time.
The riddle of steel.
Yes.
You know what it is, don't you, boy? Shall I tell you? It's the least I can do.
A good example of that training is mystery. If you write mystery fiction, the understanding is your audience will be patient for the first 2 chapters. Like that's an understanding by the publisher that it's okay if you're building up and these ideas don't seem to have an immediate payoff because you're laying groundwork that later will be part of the mystery.
Well, and then it breaks down even, again, more granular depending on the type of mystery. In a cozy mystery, which are usually like, this is bookstore themed, or it's cat themed or knitting themed, right? Half of that first book is getting to know the town.
Yeah.
Because you have to care about who these people
You
are.
have to feel cozy.
And why, wonder why this person died.
Yeah.
And there's two, I see, competing different ideas too with genres. One is the genre blindness. People in a story have never heard of vampires and they're totally shocked that something like that exists.
Yeah.
Versus the other one where, like you were saying, sort of turning it on its head, and people think they know what they know, and it's completely different.
And what's funny about that is that if often writers or filmmakers are accused of being too clever, and because they are assuming everyone is as versed in the genre that they are writing, and so when they subvert it, a person who came from outside sees that as the obvious solution or the obvious answer because they don't know anything about the genre. So why would that happen? Whereas if you love vampire fiction, you're like, don't invite him in, right? But if you don't know anything about vampires, you're like, well, no, he's a stranger. You wouldn't invite him in anyway, right? It's not a key plot point anyway. If you're into mysteries, the guy who's at the door and being a little creepy, you don't invite in, right? If you're in a vampire story, you immediately distrust them for different reasons if they seem they need to be invited.
I love playing with the idea that the people in the world know what those monsters' limitations are, but they often don't have those things.
Oh,
like in Shared World, star metal is a thing. It's a thing that can kill certain monsters, but it's rare. So people know this, but they also don't have it. Or it's like only silver will kill this undead thing.
Right.
I'm poor. And then that becomes some of the impetus for the story of like, why are you stealing? Well, I'm a thief, but also I'm a poor thief, and I have to kill this monster.
Yeah.
My big thing with the genre is I started out as an avant-garde experimental writer, and I moved into the horror genre because I realized at a certain point this is the audience for horror. That's the audience that's trained on avant-garde experimental techniques. That's the audience that understands surrealism. That's the audience I don't have to constantly justify what I'm doing to, because they weirdly have more training in how to read an avant-garde experimentalist, a surrealistically inflected story than the so-called, literary crowd.
Because they're more willing to travel blindly into the unknown.
Yeah, they don't have a bunch of
see what's
stupid
there.
questions.
Yeah.
Because of course the monster, can do that. Of course, you tell the story.
This reminds me of when I was babysitting someone, and the only thing that was on TV was Alien, and so that's what we watched. And she was way too young to watch Alien, but she just kept asking me questions. She's like, "What's that?" I'm like, "It's an alien." What's it doing? It's killing that person. Why? It's an alien, and that made total sense to her.
Of course.
And she still reads genre. I don't know how the rest of her life turns out, but I know she still reads genre.
Now an astrobiologist.
That's
It's, more expert.
Yeah.
So if you come back around to the grocery store analogy, and we also remember how James and I started asking the question why, right? So in the grocery store analogy, if it's a horror story and you go into the cereal aisle, it's just a question of which of these boxes has more nuts in it, right? If you go into the horror genre, it's like, from whence does the uncomfortable nature, where does it come from, right? Is it a monster? Is it a madness? Is it another thing? But when we had to ask ourselves within the genre things, and you were like, oh, it's a bow, and it's stone arrows. And I said, why? He's like, because I believe said, because you could make them from anything. And if he runs everywhere and they don't have anything, he can cut down a tree and he can make a bow and arrow.
Yep.
And I was like, okay, but why, if stone is everywhere, Why does only stones kill these monsters? Well, that has to be stone that came from somewhere else. And so, well, what kind of stones come from somewhere else where that people who run around in big fields might notice? Oh, falling stars, right? And so the one thing just begat another as we explored the story. But we didn't say, do you think that makes sense?
No, and I think that there's a freedom in being able to be.
No, that's your.
Interrupting your own podcast.
No, that's your.
I was in my.
That's me. That's my bad.
that's not
I don't know who the heck's paying.
Let's all look awkwardly at James.
Or shame.
You were saying, James, before your phone thought they were more important.
Worse than any phone being.
Yeah.
This machine here.
I was saying that there's the freedom to be able to just state what is fact, and then you build all the rules around that.
Yeah, because I was like, what can he see at a distance? How big can something be built by people and be visible on the horizon? How big would it actually have to be? And that's where these whole ideas of these massive, ancient megastructures.
Well, it's the fun of the genre is to be able to make a statement and not necessarily have to build it around logic. I mean, logic has its place.
Yeah.
But at the same idea, you can make something logical in the world. We have full control.
Because
the world.
The only important logic when you're writing is the logic of what a story needs to move this character through the story in a way that is interesting to the reader. The other things are not real. So you don't have to know why the tower existed, and you don't have to know the name of the empire that built it, unless it's useful.
Will the reader
story.
forgive you for those lapses?
They'll always forgive you. Yeah.
And we
if
have
they enjoyed the story.
they're
If
not
you enjoyed the
lapses,
story, you will make...
You're assuming they enjoyed the story.
No, well,
If
that's
you're
all you can do.
If you're looking for an audience for your genre, like in
Don't.
Marvel,
Don't do that.
That's the mistake everyone.
Don't look for an audience. You're writing in the firelight. You're just trying to have fun, the most fun you can have telling the story so that you finish the story. Then once the story's finished and you start sending it to editors, they start grinding the edge of the axe for you, right? They start saying, oh, if you want it to be like this, shave this piece off. And if you don't, well, don't, right?
And where they find the holes, we often have the most fun. Again, we've created something illogical that doesn't make sense. We make sense of it.
Yeah, midichlorians.
The mistake, that's the mistake people make is filling those holes. Like that's the big Star Wars mistake. Not to go into that. That's the mistake.
Sometimes
you
the back
airtight,
are left
close
soft.
the world, and now there's nothing a person can do in it anymore.
Once you pin yourself down.
Yeah, if you pin yourself
But
down.
the other point is too that editors, anybody, doesn't really know what people like.
Yeah.
Because, well, Star Wars is a classic example. How many studios did he try to sell that one to before somebody finally took a chance on it? Oh, nobody wants to watch a kid's show.
a lot of money is at stake.
And
A lot.
well, even I forget who it was, one of the big shots of the music industry, who told Michael Jackson that Billie Jean song isn't very good. It shouldn't be on the album.
So
Yeah, no,
tastes
you
change.
You can't predict.
Yeah,
Yes.
tastes change. And if you are looking to understand the audience beyond the firelight, it's false. There's just darkness beyond the firelight. That's all there is. You can't really make it out. And if you think you can, I think you're probably deluding yourself.
Well, and the right story can change tastes.
There's
I
still
only
no matter-
liked second world fantasy.
Right.
I didn't want to read any fantasy in our world. I live in our world.
Right.
And then I read Tanya Huff,
Right.
and I'm like, oh,
Yeah. Oh, this could be cool.
These blood books are pretty damn good.
Yeah.
And then that became the thing that ended up as my first published book was an urban fantasy in the vein of what Tanya had done.
Yeah, and I also had no interest in writing anything created to the world I lived in until I started, till I read No Country for Old Men. And then I was like, oh, our own world can be shaped into a genre funnel also by just leaving out any parts of the world you find boring. You just keep shaving it away until it's this other kind of story.
Our Lord pleases you, Crom. So grant me one request.
grant me revenge. And if you do not listen, then the hell with you.
Real or imagined, you have to. You're looking at fire. There's people that are real or imagined. And they're going to have a reaction. And if you're going to have a genre like Marvel, Stan Lee talked to his wife and sort of said, "I hate this job. I'm going to quit." And his wife said, "Write the story you want to tell."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then guess what? The story he wanted to tell was the story people wanted to read.
That's why
solid point.
Yeah.
It is a solid point, but it's also why it's also a good example of why you can't
It
listen
leaves
to
out
the
Jack
audience.
Kirby just for.
Listen to your wife.
Yeah. You need somebody to test things on,
Yeah.
but it's all about manipulating them. It's not about doing what they want.
Right. And the story is the unit that we're talking about, right? Ultimately, what we're trying to do is tell an entertaining story that also informs some element of the human condition. It doesn't matter if a wizard shows up if that mortal has not tried to strive, right? Then you don't care. You just won't care,
Yeah.
right?
Well, you kind of got to see like that the striving shows that some mortal. Do you want to shut the door? Yeah, we'll be other. That the mortal character is like it has to work for it. It can't just be an easy solution. They have to actually want something.
Yeah.
And need something, and usually those two things are in conflict.
Because the person sitting in the chair,
Yeah.
they're just reading a book.
Yeah.
I've said this many times before, but one of my favorite stories about Bill Ransom talking to Frank Herbert is he's like, how do we build this whole world? Do we need to know about the robots? Do we need to know about these mutants? Do we need to know about this technology? And Frank Herbert said to him, no, Bill, people read stories. Robots don't read them. Monsters don't read them. Just do the people part, and it's all going to work out.
You get the people down, you're probably fine.
Yeah.
I think the thing that people really misunderstand when they start writing stories set in any sort of fantasy world is that they feel like they have to build the world. It doesn't matter what's going on in the world beyond what is happening right now in this moment with these characters. All they need to know is what's happening in front of them. Is there a tree in front of them? Then you maybe need to know what kind of tree that is. You don't need to know every tree in the world.
Yeah.
You have to have a certain level of consistency.
But you just build this consistency.
But so now,
add a thing.
yeah. So like when you're talking about just like the methodology of to write the next sentence, but what I believe you're describing, if I may be so bold, is the style of the individual writer. Some people love to luxuriate in certain details, but that's just what they like as a writer.
We don't want exposition, we want story.
Right. Yeah. But some writers love writing exposition.
I mean, world building is fun, right? Like
You don't want
for the writer.
Well, world building is also one of those things that
Yeah.
feels like writing but isn't actually writing, which is
Yeah.
finishing the
But
story.
you don't want the Hollywood fist fight,
Right.
where normally you punch someone hard enough, they go down and they don't get up. Whereas Hollywood, they keep coming back, and they come back, and they come back, and they come back until, then they just shake it all off and walk away.
Well, because the goal in that specific instance of Bollywood fistfight is to entertain. And if you don't have character development, you must have action. That's just one of the rules of film, right? Is that there has to be something happening. And if they're not going to say something interesting, they have to be doing something interesting. And if the story is weak, well, it's much easier to have them jump through a window than walk through the door in order to keep people.
But as an example with magic, at what point does magic fail? If you can wave your wand and do anything.
Yeah.
Well, where's the tension? Where's the...
But, well, let's just, since we have a few minutes left, I'm going to just hold you to this idea. There is this, what they call it sometimes in comics, the Superman problem, but I reject it outright, right? The notion of the Superman problem, dear listener, is the idea that since he can do anything, what could be the challenge of writing a Superman story? What challenge couldn't he face? If you had a wand that can make anything happen, what?
Larry Niven wrote a good story.
Yeah. Well, the point underlying it is, what are the limits of your imagination? If you allow the genre convention to be the limit to what can be done, then yes, there is a Superman problem. But if you say, well, what is the problem of a man who can't be hurt by anything? Well, that inherently is a problem. Where does the human condition derive from? It derives from the ways in which we are hurt and overcome, right? Mortals who strive. And so if he is not a mortal who strives, right, then is even a story worth telling? No. And so you give him parents who have taught him how to think and be like a human in the culture that he's in. So he understands that other mortals must strive and can be hurt. If he can love them, well, now he can be hurt because they can be hurt, right? And so now that's the story we understand, because regular people know what it's like to lose someone they love. And it doesn't matter if they have been physically injured, they have been destroyed.
This is why my DC pitch for Superman, which they did not like,
Is why doesn't Superman say people from hell?
Right. A great subversion of the genre. Now, I know the DC editor would push up his glasses and say, well, magic hurts Superman. And also, we have to be careful, Jonathan. He can't go fight the devil because it opens up a whole bunch of other problems, because we are a mass market 4-quadrant publisher. So we can't do it like
He is allowed to meet Santa Claus.
Once you mix genres, magic and Superman.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Superman
you
isn't
can't
it?
unmix them.
See, this is what, and this comes back around to the idea of the switch, right? It's science fiction because Superman's impossible things arrived on Earth when someone pushed a button and launched the rocket to Earth. That's science fiction, right? But if you can go to hell, well, that's someone waving wands, and now you're cross genre. Well, actually, genre is often crossing, and that's what makes it the most interesting. And so if you try to keep it too pure, you're actually forgetting the fun that you can have.
But then if you mix, you're back to the whole, what if he can't be hurt routine?
Yeah. But imagine this. Let's make your story more of what it is. Krypton had a mythology, right? And what if Krypton's devil was also the devil of the human world? And that's why the Kryptonians knew to send him to Earth, because the morality would be equivalent. It's not an alien culture. It's a culture that is striving against the same evil. So you can immediately bring it down to something that is of use, right? If Superman meets the devil and he goes, oh man, I've seen your picture before, right? From a civilization far away that doesn't exist, right? Is it an alien threat? Now are we science fiction again? Is it a metaphysical threat? You know, it's not whether or not you're right. Is the story fun to read? God damn it. That's it, right? So I think this has been a lively conversation, and I have so enjoyed recording with all of you here at Keycon 42 in our live recording of Super Pulp Science. I want to thank all of you for your participation, for your attention, and I want to say, gentlemen, I am looking forward to our secret shared world conclave that we're going to have soon after this podcast is over. This has been Super Pulp Science. I'm GMB Kamichuk, encouraging you all to join the fight and make comics.